Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamerTech.com video, we're going to be taking a look at the current direction Microsoft are taking with the Xbox One, and how I feel that they're going in terms of the design of the hardware, the software, their policies, and pretty much everything else. Now, this video is going to be a little bit itsy-bitsy, in other words, we're going to be touching on many different subjects, some of which I've covered extensively before, and so if you're curious about those parts of the videos, then you can always check out the channel. But one of the biggest changes, of course, I've made recently is the departure of Don Mattrick. Now, obviously, we're not really sure whether, well, currently whether he was either fired or left of his own volition, or whether it was a combination of the two or what. But definitely that change alone, along with, of course, the always online DRM removal, is going to be a very positive step forward for Microsoft. And one of the things they have to do now, of course, is to actually be very careful and to actually decide what they're going to do. It was only a couple of days ago, and I actually decided not to report the news because I saw it and I decided that it was really biased, and I don't really like reporting news that is heavily biased. Sure, if there's a piece of bad news of the company, just for example, one of the hardware plants for Microsoft explodes or whatever, it's really bad for them, but I don't consider that biased news. I consider that, well, that's just a negative for them. It just happened, and that's the end of it. Same as when, say, the PlayStation Network got hacked. However, recently there was an article on Edge, in fact it was the front cover, which basically said that your next generation console will be the PlayStation 4. And they even went further and said how Microsoft have made so many bad decisions, so many atrocious business decisions, and pissed off so many customers that you're pretty much left no other choice, and that was their words, well, paraphrasing, but basically no other choice but to get the PlayStation 4. And I actually didn't like that. Not because I'm a massive Sony fan or a massive Microsoft fan or whatever, but I don't like magazines showing that level of biasness, because it's not, in my opinion at least, it's not good for the industry. And I understand sometimes that magazines and journalists in general will put out sensational articles because, after all, that's either how you sell a magazine or you get views on your video or whatever. But I still don't think it's very professional. That's my personal opinion, of course. Now, if I was to ask you guys who Nolan Bushnell is, I'm pretty sure many of you would know him. A few of you may scratch your head, but he was basically the founder of Atari. And Atari, of course, are pretty much credited for single-handedly kickstarting the video gaming revolution. Obviously, since then, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony have definitely bought it into the popular foray, but many would agree that without Bushnell's contributions, very little in the industry would have happened, at least in the way that you would see it. And it's kind of funny because back in April of this year, he actually was happy enough to report that Sony's online infrastructure is god-awful. I quote that as well. And he actually said that he believed that Microsoft themselves would have a clear and present advantage in this because, well, Microsoft's technology is so profound. Things like Windows Azure, which was spoken about heavily, the cloud and everything else. So he was actually, I wouldn't say pro-Microsoft or anything like that, but he believed quite firmly that Microsoft themselves are onto a winner. However, fast forward just a couple of months, and he has said, and I quote, they totally screwed it up. And he was talking about the fact that basically he believes that they want to sell you a service. They want to sell you rental. They want to basically rent you a service. They want to sell you Office as a service, for example, is one of the things that he mentioned. He said that despite the fact that they've removed DRM, they basically just want you to rent the titles. And of course, others have actually said that Microsoft themselves are most likely going to try to inspire you to buy the games digitally, because if you buy a game digitally, DRM has to be there in place. There's just no other way around it. And he's actually quoted in saying, in the back of their mind, they look at 1 billion Chinese people, and they sell less software there than they do in a small town of Texas. Now, this is because of the out of quote. This is because of the rampant piracy in China. It's that simple. Microsoft in the past have sold Windows there ridiculously cheap. I don't remember what the pricing is, but it was really cheap because they believed it was better to get a small, very small amount from these guys than very little. And of course, China is an emerging market and all of that, and they have a lot of buying power, but it also turns out that they also have a lot of piracy power too. Now, Bushnell himself is actually very positive on game trading, and of course the whole purpose of game trading right now is really up in the air. However, he reports and he says that he believes it's actually a positive thing, because he believes that some people just, simple as this, they cannot afford to buy a new game. It is that simple. He says that a $50 game is a discontinuity. There are a lot of people who cannot afford a $50 game that can, and that's why there's always been ability to do so. If you can't afford a new pair of jeans, you just go to a thrift shop and buy a used pair, and the same thing goes with games. Some people are willing to be the person who is the first on the block to get a game at full price, and if you're willing to wait a month or two, you can get it for half price. What happens in that case is the person who bought the first instance has a little bit of money, so he can continue to buy new games at a higher rate than he would have otherwise. He's even quoted in saying, "I think the industry gets more money if you look at the whole picture, because I think that people will spend what they can afford. And if you make the hurdle too high for people who are not as well off, they just won't be able to buy games at all." So, what other changes would I like to see from Microsoft? What changes would I love to see from Microsoft? One of them, without a question, the first, most obvious, and simplest change that they could possibly make is to remove the mandatory Kinect sensor. Simple as that. Just get rid of it. Now, I know what you're going to say, but it's one of the things that separates the Xbox from the PS4. It has a lot of cool technology. Certain games are going to need it, and I understand all of that. And my personal opinion is they should make it an incentive, make it cheaper, make it as cheap as possible to buy separately, but remove it as a requirement. Why? There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, the PS4 doesn't have a Kinect sensor as a requirement. Therefore, games developers, in my opinion, at least at the start, are going to be very loathed to really make features that are mandatory and extremely useful on Kinect. Therefore, you're going to get this bastardized half-house where you have kind of the same issue with, say, Black Ops or whatever on the Wii U, where there is passing support for the Wii U pad, but nothing exactly what you consider, wow, this is an absolute huge advantage. And the actual Wii U pad itself, for example, when you're scanning rooms or whatever, I've heard mixed things about it, but most people agree that it's annoying. Like, a couple of people I actually know who own Wii U's say that whenever they look down on a pad, especially when it's an action game, invariably that's when a zombie or whatever is down chewing on their face. In other words, sure, some of this stuff can be quite innovative. In fact, I mentioned just yesterday how Mikami was basically talking about horror games and how with the Kinect technology it can be used really well for horror games, because in his opinion, and it's actually kind of funny because I've mentioned this well before he did, maybe stealing my ideas. Anyway, I'm just kidding. But you can obviously monitor your heart rate and so forth, and it can actually figure out how scared you are on something. So, for example, okay, does this monster make you scared? Does this scenario make you scared? And it can use that. It's a much more sophisticated way of doing like a psychological test or whatever. From one of the Silent Hills, I don't remember which one it is. It may have been Shattered Memories or whatever. But when it does that test, of course, it basically tries to figure out how to make it scary for you. Whereas this test would basically be consistent, so it can monitor you, figure out when you need a small break to increase your fear and so on, and that would be really cool. So Kinect in those respects could be pretty awesome, and I would like to see it. But in my opinion, it's a bonus. It's like it's an extra. The problem is as well, Microsoft are really pushing the fact that, yes, they've got this cloud-based technology, and we're going to heavily talk about that in a moment, and the fact that numbers are meaningless, and that the Xbox One is, with the cloud is ridiculously more powerful, blah, 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 blah. The problem is, it's a very difficult sell, because ultimately, people look at the PlayStation 4 and they feel that it's more powerful. Simple. It's a mathematical equation of, is X more powerful than Y? Yes. So why am I being charged more for it? And there's a simple reason, the Kinect sensor. And that's not really a good position to be in, especially when most people, including myself by the way, just don't give a rat's ass about it. It's simple. I just don't. I don't want to Kinect. It's not that I'm even that paranoid about it monitoring, me watching TV or whatever. But at the same time, I just don't want it because I don't want the technology in the console. I don't want it increasing the price of the console. Some people, of course, argue that the PlayStation 3 was ridiculously priced at the time. Sony, however, were quite lucky in one respect. That was, back then, HD technology, of course, was still around and all of that, but it was nowhere near as prevalent as what it is now. And more to the point, Blu-ray wasn't. And so a lot of people who were buying the PlayStation 3, you could also argue, well, I'm buying a games machine and I'm also buying a Blu-ray player, so, hey, that offsets it. And so there was also another argument, of course, the fact that playing online was free, as it turns out, of course, for the most part was inferior to the gold service of Xbox Live, but whatever. Now, Microsoft themselves have removed the, how can we put this, requirement to pay where if you want to update your game, which in my opinion was just absolutely ludicrous. That one just really hurt my head. I just don't understand why you charge into developers or any developers to basically update their title. It just didn't make sense to me, but now they've removed that rather ridiculous pitfall. The problem is, let's just be honest, right now, the iPhone is definitely more popular for games than Android. Even though I own an Android, the game selection, at least from what I've looked, I'm not really much of a phone gamer, but from what I've looked, the selection on iPhone is definitely better than that of Android. But for indies, the PC and the PS4 is definitely going to be their home away from home. And that's just ridiculous to me. Okay, the PS4 is slightly more powerful, whatever. The point being that, honestly speaking, it doesn't matter for 99% of indie games. And the fact that they're basically the same architecture, it should be a case of the PS4 and Xbox One should be pretty much interchangeable. In other words, if an indie game's coming out on a PS4, there should be absolutely no reason whatsoever, unless that person really just doesn't like Microsoft or whatever, that it's not coming out on that platform. It is that simple, and yet they're making it more difficult than what it should be for indie developers. And obviously they are slowly starting to turn around this policy, but come on now, just make it as easy as possible for them. Give them a glass of milk or something if they come on board. Whatever you've got to do to lure them in. Do not make Sony the hero here. It's not good for you. It's that simple, because there is a hell of a lot of gamers out there that support indies. It's not that, they hate Electronic Arts or Capcom or whatever. It's just a simple case of they support indie developers because they appreciate the fact that they're small, that they're struggling, and so forth. And that's one of the reasons that things such as Humble Bundle and Kickstarter do so bloody well. It's one of the reasons that you're now starting to see models such as the pay for early access, where obviously you pay for, say, alpha access of the game, so the game's obviously not even finished yet, and yet you pay for it, and you can enjoy it, you can give feedback to the indies or whatever studios are actually creating the title, and that's that, and it makes sense. So Microsoft really need to just get their head out of their butts and really push that forward. So I think the biggest thing Microsoft need to do, and probably the one that I've spoken most about, but I think it really is a prerequisite to talk about again, is gaming. Now, Microsoft have shown a pretty strong lineup at E3, and in my opinion, it was good they did. In my opinion, and I might get some flack from this, I didn't see anything there that was really, oh my goodness. But then I felt the same, to be honest, about the PlayStation 4 as well. I didn't see any titles there that I thought to myself, this is amazingly unique, or this is something that just couldn't be done on previous generation of consoles. And we're going to speak about that actually in a different one, because there are some various comments that I found from some developers that is quite interesting. So I'm going to talk about that in another video because it's quite a lengthy subject. But let's just be honest. Microsoft got off completely on the wrong foot. They talked heavily about the live TV services and so forth, and their thinking behind it in some ways was logical. They wanted to announce the system, they wanted to say, yes, we've got some games, but they wanted to show off what was new on the system. The problem is you can't do that. It's almost the equivalent of, well, in this case, it's just the equivalent of them talking about all these new things that no one's really asked about, and yet the service that people actually know you'll get your system for, the reason that people want to buy it originally, so in other words, the reason that people were talking about Durango back then, was because of the games. People didn't give a shit about the live TV services. And the problem is, I'm still yet to understand exactly the purpose of the live TV service. Now, I understand there are going to be some exclusive channels and content and all of that, which is fine, fantastic. But I've got to say, I was amazed that Microsoft really pushed the TV services as much as they did. I was amazed of the fact that they were really proud of these things such as Skype calls and hand gestures for Internet Explorer and everything else. Because they were really proud about saying stuff like, well, gee whiz, if you are watching, TV, whatever that is, whether it's sports or whatever, you can call up your friend Billy Bob or Ben or, Thomas Capone or whatever, and you can speak to this guy while you're watching live TV. Okay. Tell me more as I'm, beating you on the head with a sledgehammer, because that just doesn't make sense to me. If I just paid for a pay-per-view event, whether that I'm not really into sports that much, as you guys know. I'm sometimes into like a little bit of UFC, wrestling a little bit, but mostly bodybuilding, but whatever. But let's assume that I paid for a UFC event, just for example, pure speculation. And my friend, Stephen, decided, hey, you know what? I see Paul's online. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give him a Skype call. Yeah, I'm going to answer that, honestly. I just spent like £15 or whatever on the event, whatever it cost me. So my first instinct is to start missing some or having, my friend talking over the live TV. Yeah, that's just not going to happen in any way, shape, form, way, or possibility. It's just not. I have no interest in it. It's just not going to happen. And all these Skype calls, these internet TV gestures, all of this stuff. I mean, stuff like you can switch between live TV and a game just by giving a command. Or, alternatively, I could just press a button on remote control. I do have that, It's a pretty new invention, Microsoft. You might have heard of it. And I know I'm coming across maybe really harsh here, but my point being that people want to see games, and the reason that you are going to pay £420 or whatever it is in your currency, it's because of the games, I imagine. I don't think many people who are not that interested in games are going to cough up that amount of cash. Simple as that. I don't think many people who are not that heavily into gaming are going to want to pay that amount of money, because it just doesn't really make sense. So does that mean I actually think they should remove this stuff, that that stuff should be removed completely, the Xbox One shouldn't be able to watch live TV? And no, because that's also somewhat silly as well. They've put all the work into the console. And that's fine. However, there are a couple of concerns I've got. One revolves around the resources of the console. Now, I don't care how you look at it, but there are finite resources on any next generation console. This goes for the PlayStation 4, this goes for the PC. Even a PC, for example, has limited resources, of course, and so forth, and so on, and so on. And the problem is, when you have a console, when you design a console, when you say to developers, okay, this is the amount of memory that you have to work with. For example, and I know I've used this a couple of times before, but it just bears repeating, the Killzone post-mortem document for, of course, the PS4, you can see that it's using 6 of the 8 CPU cores. Now, we don't know if that's all there are available to developers, or whether that's Sony just being very cautious and just saying that just use 6 for now, and the other 2, we'll let you know if it's 7 in reserve are available, or whether it's 6 or what. But regardless, they've got those resources to work with. Simple. And we know the same thing for the Xbox. There's going to be a certain amount of memory available for the operating system. There's going to be a certain amount of memory available for this and drivers and everything else. The problem I've got is that when you start heavily adding a lot of this multitasking functionality, so for example, watching live TV, voice commands with Kinect, Internet Explorer being instant loading in the background, and all of this other good stuff, ultimately you are putting less memory available for games. And I don't care how heavily you optimize that, the point being, even if, say, Internet Explorer with multiple tabs open, let's say it takes 200 megabytes and all of the other bits and pieces, the thing is, this is all taking memory that could be used for gaming, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good idea. Another issue you've got to think about is, right now they are pushing Skype, they are pushing Internet Explorer, and here's the thing. First of all, Internet Explorer, yuck. There is some new news that is basically the Internet Explorer is going to be using the GPU to heavily render web pages. I don't care, the thing crashes consistently. True story, and I actually kid you not here. I've actually got instances on work where I actually need to use Internet Explorer. So it's a prerequisite. I have to actually use it for a few things. And so I've got a couple of tabs open or IE, and sometimes I have to actually just reopen the bloody Internet Explorer because it's as simple as it's not going to the address. It just keeps acting as if it's going forward. And I've even got little issues like that on a couple of other systems as well. Internet Explorer is just not good, and they can, they have to make some really big changes for that. And the thing is, they're trying to push this new revolution in technology, but I think sometimes they're trying to force this too much, and I think if they'd have slowly introduced these features, maybe not focus so much on the multi-tabbing thing, because that's just a PC at the end of the day, right? You can do that with a PC, and a lot of the stuff is just available. I don't necessarily know if it's even possible to cut the stuff out of the console now, because it was designed from the ground up. I think definitely if you're playing a full game, it may be a good idea for them just to give all of the resources available for that game, so that it's at least at less of an advantage as possible, so give as much CPU, GPU, and memory grunt available. The PS4, I remember Mark Cerny recently speaking about how the PS4's going to allow compute tasks on the GPU, and he said that as the PS4 gets older, developers will be able to use that much more efficiently, which we kind of knew anyway. Now, Microsoft themselves have made some pretty huge and expensive decisions before. They, of course, fixed the whole red ring of death issues of their own volition. In other words, pretty much it cost them money, but they fixed it. They've done other things, such as huge price cuts and various other bits and pieces. So we know that they are capable of it. We know that they are able to make massive, sweeping changes to their hardware or their philosophies based upon what's necessary. The problem is, a lot of people right now are writing off Microsoft, and in another video, which is going to be the next couple of days or so, I might only just starting to feel better from a really bad cold and pretty much everything else I had for a couple of days, so I'm a little bit behind where I should be, which I can only apologise for. But I also want to do a video on the PlayStation, but just to give you a little thought, a lot of people summarise the PlayStation one of two ways. One, they loved it. The other is well, what's new? One thing I will say for Microsoft, and this isn't actually a video ragging on Microsoft, because I actually quite like a lot of the stuff they've done. But one of the things that I will say about Microsoft is that they did try to do some innovation. I think that they came across the wrong way. The problem is now they've got to a point where they have to go back on it, because you've already pissed them off, so you can't then try to do it a different way. You have to then go back on it because there's so much at risk of losing market share right now. As others have said, if they'd have been less abrasive, if they'd have known how to get the message across better, they probably would have gotten away with a lot of the stuff of the DRM with Always Online, but as it turns out, they've just pissed people off. Sony, on the other hand, it's the equivalent of two people. I mean, this is from Yahtzee. I'm sure you guys know about Zero Punctuation. And I was watching his roundup of E3, and I think he summarised it really well. It was the equivalent of Microsoft going on stage at E3 and stabbing themselves repeatedly in the stomach. And this isn't exactly this is pretty much paraphrasing him, but pretty much what he said. Microsoft stabbed themselves repeatedly on the stomach, took a bow, and that was it. And everyone just kind of looked at them, why did you do this? And then Sony came on stage and said, I don't actually want to stab myself in the belly. That shit looks like it's painful. And everyone gave them a round of applause because it was a simple case of, well, at least this guy's not an idiot. In other words, my point being that Sony didn't really do that much. I'm on the mindset that the PlayStation 4 does look a really cool console. It looks pretty interesting in terms of the games available and everything else, but I've been around the block now. I've seen the PS1, PS2, PS3, and now, of course, PS4 launching, and I was playing games well before that. This is what you get, you see, when you're in your late 20s. And suffice to say, or mid to late 20s, shall I say, but suffice to say that they've got some interesting ideas, they've got some really cool features, but a lot of it just feels a natural evolution of what we've got now. Better graphics, better controller and everything else. But I don't really think Sony did anything amazing in terms of what they've actually been doing. I really like their decisions in terms of their business decisions with, say, Indie, with how easy the system is to program for, and stuff like that. But I don't really think they've done anything huge. Microsoft, on the other hand, have tried to bring in some innovation. They've just done it in a really bad way. It's actually kind of funny because Microsoft themselves have gotten to a position where just up until a couple of weeks ago, before the DRM removal, I actually got to the point where I didn't want to actually report bad news on the system. And I'm actually being deadly serious there. Why? Because I felt that I was actually just picking on the system at that point. I was actually deliberately looking for good news to post about the system, because it was getting to the point now where it was becoming cool. It became the new internet meme to basically bash Microsoft, and that's not really the direction I wanted to go with the channel, because in my opinion it's not very professional. At the same time, it was getting increasingly more difficult to find something that was positive on the system. For example, even recently we've got this whole headset fiasco where they're not including the headset because Kinect is there, and yet, rather amusingly, on the marketing for the very same headset, they say, and I quote, that it is pretty much a requirement. It is very advised. It is very good to have if you want to play online games. Yet, in the reasoning to not include it, they're saying it's because the Kinect sensor does a pretty good job, so which one is it? Now, obviously, they want to sell you this product separately, but the thing is, I've heard it's not even that good of quality anyway. But to be fair to them, apparently there are rumours that they're going to put in some kind of converter or something to allow you to use Xbox 360 headsets. The point being, originally, why the hell did they not just make it a standard jack like the PlayStation does? Okay, the PlayStation comes with a crappy headset. Without question, it is not a high quality one. It is not going to set the world alight in terms of quality, and most people will probably want to replace it if they're serious about online. But hey, at least it gives you something. It throws you a bone. Microsoft don't seem to be doing that, and that's not a good position either. You're paying a lot more money for a system, you're not even including the headset with it. It's not really a good start. I would like to see them change that as well. All these little touches are just little things, and sure, they may seem petty to some, they may seem unimportant to others, but to other people, if you're sitting there unsure which system to get, and believe me, I have had people ask me, what system do you think I should get with X budget? I've had those questions. And it's very, very, very hard if someone has no loyalty between either system and they've messaged me and they've said, which system do I go for? The best advice I can give is, what system interests you the most in terms of the games lineup that you know about, and what system best fits into your budget? The problem is, invariably, for a lot of people, that means the PlayStation, because the PlayStation is simply cheaper. And one of the reasons for this, of course, is the whole Kinect thing. So I'd like for them to make a couple of changes for the package. I'd like for them to remove the Kinect completely. Make it a separate edition, fine. Make a headset bundled in, or change the port so it is standard, whatever they can do with the time schedule they've got left. I would like for them to do a few other bits and pieces as well, but I think Microsoft as a whole have a lot of potential with the Xbox One. I think that they've gotten off to a very shaky start. But Nintendo right now, of course, are in this really odd position themselves. They're in this position where developers simply don't know whether to support their system or not, because Nintendo have typically been really successful, especially the original Wii. So no one wants to really burn their bridges with Nintendo, but at the same time, they don't really want to support the game by spending millions, quite literally, developing and publishing a title, tens of millions probably, more like it, and then the game just sells barely enough to even break even, maybe even not even break even at all. And so it's a very tricky decision for companies to do, and therefore it is not good, because obviously in polls before the DRM issue in particular was resolved, polls were showing 5 or even 6 to 1 in favour of the PlayStation 4, and these are starting to balance out now, but it's not good for gamers in my opinion, because I don't want a situation where the PlayStation 4, as Edge magazine puts it, is the only option, because it is bad, it is not good for business for either us, for Microsoft, or even for Sony for that matter. Overall, Microsoft are definitely heading in a better direction than what they were just a couple of weeks ago. I think Mattrick's departure is very good. I think it's going to be a very positive thing for the company. I think right now it looks like Julie Larson Green, I think is her name, from memory. It looks like she's going to be taking over. It's an interesting background she's got. It's mostly under software/UI, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I do somewhat worry that she's not heavily into the gaming side of things as before, but not necessarily a bad thing. But I think that Microsoft themselves need to make some really sweeping changes, and I think that they also need to be a lot more careful with the PR they put out. But overall, I think that if they make some changes to their system, they focus a lot on the games, they just keep pushing the gaming side of things, and they just be a bit more careful of how they are interviewed as well, because that's another issue. And one of the issues from this is simple. If, for example, Mark Cerny made a comment that is a bit dicey, and of course he's the lead architect on the Sony side of things for the PS4, if he made a comment that could have been taken a little bit dicey, he's right now considered a really popular person, especially for Sony fans, but even in the general press he's considered, quite well respected and so on, and so they'd probably give him the benefit of the doubt, and there'd be a lot less getting the pitchforks. On the other hand, Microsoft have pretty much been in a position where they've pissed off everyone, and therefore the pitchforks are basically right outside their doorsteps, and the villagers are just ready to go after them. Therefore, they have to be especially careful. And that's kind of unfair in some ways, because obviously they've had some really bad luck. For example, Adam Orth That's just ridiculous. I mean, those comments were just, I don't even know what the hell was going on there. But this is just a case of a couple of people really put Microsoft on their defensive, and that's not a good position to be in. Anyway, hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. It's been fairly lengthy, but I will be putting out another one for the PlayStation as well. I think I've covered most of the issues. There were one or two that I haven't been able to, but for the most part I've covered what I wanted to. So leave your thoughts below, as you'd expect. Speaking of which, if you would like to contact me directly, your best bet would be to go to facebook.com/redgamingtech. Meanwhile, I'm going to get going. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you soon. Have a great day, and bye for now.